This episode is called In Context, Genesis versus the gods of ancient Near East. Because if you want to grasp the weight of what God is doing in Genesis 1, you have to know the neighborhood that it moved into. So today we are diving deep into geography, history, culture, cosmology, because the more that you understand the world around Genesis, the more clearly you will see the God within it. Are you ready? Let's get into it. Welcome to Coffee and Jesus, the podcast where scripture gets studied like strategy, theology comes wrapped in testimony, and we sip the word slow because truth this deep deserves more than a drive-through reading. Now listen, if you are still reading the first chapter of Genesis like it is Bible small talk before the real story begins, you are missing the larger point because Genesis 1 drops right into a world that is loud with gods, myths, and empires, temples that touch the skies, statues that claim to be divine, kings who thought they were gods, and gods who act worse than kings. But then here comes the book of Genesis, wherein a sovereign author utilizes only his word to bring a whole cosmos into order. The ancient Near East was not just background scenery. It was a complex ecosystem of empire and survival, stretching wide from Mesopotamia to Egypt, from the snow-capped mountains of Anatolia to the sun-scorched plains of Canaan. It was not one culture, one crown, one creed. It was a network of thrones, myths, gods, and contradictions, a place where kingdoms rose and fell and kept receipts. Some folks created a life on the floodplains. That land was known as Mesopotamia, which was located between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. It was the site of modern-day Iraq. This land incurred frequent flooding rivers that left behind silt that helped to create a harvest of wheat, barley, and flax. And where crops thrived, cities rose, such as Ur, Uruk, and Babylon. Trade routes opened, systems developed hierarchy, and when the fields kept feeding, temples got taller, priests got louder, and kings claimed the credit. Then you have Egypt, where time moved with the rhythm of the Nile. The river was the heartbeat of the land. The Nile would flood on schedule, which brought stability in the middle of the desert. And when your world is shaped by predictable floods, you do not worship chaos. You revere order. You build temples, not trenches. Your gods do not fight storms. You believe that they maintain rhythms and that they bless rituals. They uphold a hierarchy of gods, rulers, and priests. Because if your land cooperates, you believe that your theology cooperates as well. And then there was the wilderness people, nomads and herders, folks who carry their home on their back, people who move with the seasons. They trusted the mountains and the stars and each other to survive. They were not building empires, they were building endurance. Here's the point. Geography shaped theology. Environment influenced belief. If you lived where rivers surged and storms came unannounced, you probably worship gods of chaos and war. And if your crops came like clockwork, you sang praises to the gods of order and fertility. But then came Genesis, not from the mountaintop shrine, not from a warlord's throne. Genesis does not come from the center of an empire. It does not echo from the palace halls. It comes from people without a throne, nomads, wilderness survivors, people whose sandals had more mileage than their kings had territory. And their God, he does not war with chaos. He does not shout above storm gods. He whispers into dust. He forms it with his hands and he breathes. Yes, breathes. And that is the hinge, the holy turn, the difference between mythology and intimacy, between a distant deity and a present father. Other gods yield. Marduk, he warred. Ra ruled the sun and Baal battled the storms. But our God, he breathes. Not out of exhaustion, but out of intention. Not because he needed us, but because he wanted us. That breath was not borrowed, it was divine. And when it entered Adam's nostrils, dust stood up. Form took function, and the earth found its voice. It is not just creation, it is communion. From the very beginning, the breath of God was the bridge between heaven and humankind, the unseen moving into the seen, the eternal filling the temporal. So no, this is not just theology. This is identity. You were breathed into being, which means your life carries the rhythm of divine intention. You were not just made, you are animated by his breath, by his will, by his presence. Genesis says he shaped Adam from the soil, not summoned, not snapped into being, formed, fashioned, molded like a potter at work. Then he bends low and he breathes high, and man becomes a living soul. This was not mythology. This was intimacy. Where other stories start with divine battles, Genesis starts with divine touch, with divine breath, with a God who kneels to create. And this God, he does not retreat to the heavens after his work is done. He walks in the garden. He speaks with his creation. He dwells not just in Eden, but later in tents and deserts and pillars of cloud and fire, because the Israelites' origin story is not rooted in empire. It is rooted in encounter, in a God who moves with his people. He camps with them. He leads them by hand. He is not etched in stone like Egypt's God. He is not caged in temples like Mesopotamia's idols. He is living, breathing, leading. So when Genesis says, in the beginning, God, it is not just a claim about time. It is a claim about nearness, about relationship, about a God who did not create from distance, but he got up close and personal with his creation, and he still chooses to stay close to his people. That is what made Israel's theology different. Not just the claim of one God, but the kind of God that they claimed. Not a God who needed servants, but one who shared his image. Not a deity who demanded rituals to be seen, but a father who made humanity to reflect his presence. That is the scandal of Genesis. Not just that he made the world, but that he made us in his likeness, and that he stuck around to walk with us in it. In a world where gods rose and fell with geography, Genesis flips the script. This is not a regional deity. This is the creator of heaven and earth, unbothered by borders, unmoved by myths, unmatched in his majesty. Because in the only story that matters, this God does not reflect the land. The land reflects the only true God. And as we discussed before, Genesis was not the only creation story on the block. The Babylonians had Enuma Elish. Their god Marduk earned his throne through a war in heaven. He slayed Tiamat, the chaos goddess, sliced her body in two. One half became the sky and the other half became the earth. Creation in that worldview was born from blood, from violence, from conquest. Now, the Egyptians, their gods spoke creation into being, but they did it in committees. Atum, Ptah, and Ra, they all sat on the board. Egyptians literally had gods stacked on gods over there, all vying for credit, for power, for dominance. Creation came by speech, but in a room full of gods tripping over their own glory. Now, let's contrast that with Genesis. Genesis says, in the beginning, God created. Full stop. No war, no weapons, no rival deities, no divine drama, just one sovereign voice cutting through the chaos. No blood, no bruises, just let there be. And there was. Because God is not just creator, he is uncontested, unchallenged, unbothered by little gods. The Genesis story is not quiet commentary. It is instead confrontation to business as usual. God exudes main character energy because while other gods fight for dominance, my God speaks and creation listens and complies. By the time the book of Genesis was circulating, the ancient Near East was already urbanized. Mesopotamia had Uruk, Babylon, and Akkad. Egypt had Memphis and Thebes, and these were cities of power. The temples therein were power centers. Now, don't get it twisted. Temples were not just where people lit candles and whispered prayers. Temples were part of the system. They were the government. They were the treasury, the tax office, the library, the pantry of the people. If it mattered, it moved through the temple. And what sat at the center of every temple? A statue, a carved image, a physical idol meant to represent the presence of a god. It was not decorative, it was not optional. That statue was the image of the god that particular city bowed to. Now think about Genesis 1 and 26. Let us make mankind in our image. Genesis is flipping the script. It is saying, you want to see the image of God? Do not look for a statue. Look at your neighbor, not at kings, not at priests, not at ruling officials. Everyone is made in the image of God. That is not just theology. That is revolutionary rebellion. In a world that crowned kings as gods and viewed the rest as disposable, Genesis crowned humanity with glory. Here's the part that folks don't always talk about. Most scholars believe that Genesis was written, or at the very least compiled, during the Israelites' exile in Babylon. Imagine it. You have been ripped from your land, dragged across the desert, and when you finally arrive, you are forced to march beneath the shadow of Ishtar's gate. You see ziggurats scraping the sky and carved with symbols of gods who mock your pain, built for gods with names like Marduk, who they, your new capturer, says made the world through war. You are surrounded by architecture that screams empire, by myths that normalize oppression, by theology that justifies brutality. And in that moment, while the world says that your God is defeated, the scribes of Israel pick up their pens and they open their scroll and they say, in the beginning, God created. Not Marduk, not a group project between little gods, not a battle, just God, one voice, one word, one creator. That is resistance literature. That is worship as protest. That is theology laced with identity. The first chapter of Genesis is not just a prologue, it is a call to remember, a call to resist, a call to rehearse the truth when the current day empire tries to rewrite history, tries to rewrite the script. When Babylon, or you know who, tries to rename you, Genesis reminds you who you really are. Tell me that don't apply to today. Here's what I need you to carry from today's conversation. Genesis 1 is not just about how the word began, it's about who ran it. It's about the kind of God that rules it. It's about the kind of people that we were meant to be. You were created in the image of the divine, not to dominate, but to reflect, not to build empires, but to rule like Eden. The more you understand the world that Genesis was written in, the more you will realize that this was never just a story. It was always a declaration. God is sovereign. Chaos was contained, and you were made with purpose, on purpose. So do not just read the book of Genesis, live it, breathe it, walk in it. Genesis does not stutter. The word does not guess. The word does not flinch. The word speaks because the word is God. Whew. Now that was a good one. I hope today's discussion stretched your mind and stirred your spirit. And if this helped you see the word in a whole new way, share it. Tag a Bible nerd, a truth seeker, or that friend who thinks Genesis is just background. Until next time, sip the word, speak the word, stand on the word, stay blessed, stay curious, and keep doing all the things with grace and with God.